Well, hello, and welcome to the PJH Writing Command Center. And I am Paul John Househaven of God Bless the Cake Publishing, LLC. And here we are for another rated music video in our rated series. And today we are going to dive into the great progressive rock band Yes. And we're going to rate the 5 best studio recordings by Yes. And if you look back on the genre, progressive rock, of course, kind of fell out of vogue. It was heavy in the 70s and maybe touching the edges of the early 80s, and then kind of went out of vogue with punk rock and grunge and all these other things that came into vogue. But Yes persevered, made a fantastic comeback with Owner of a Lonely Heart and the studio album there with a hodgepodge of different characters, and they've had lineup changes over the years and cast of band members changing, but nothing. My old man used to say, if you stick around long enough, you're going to be all right in the end. I think that epitomizes Yes, because you got Genesis and Emerson, Lake and Palmer and the great Jethro Tull, one of my favorite bands of all time, and Camel and the Renaissance with the great Annie, one of the great female voices in all of rock and roll, and Pink Floyd and King Crimson, and it just goes on and on. Uh, but Yes might be the ultimate survivor of progressive rock. So, at any rate, let's get right to it. And we go 5-1 here at God Bless the Keg Publishing, with 5 being really great and 1 being phantasmagorical, almost off the charts. I don't understand websites, and I wrote music reviews for years, magazines, whatever. The 500 greatest songs in rock and roll history. How do you even filter out the material? How do you get down to that minutia? Once you get past 25, my goodness, it must be awful difficult. Hey, what do I know? I had a hard time with Yes because I love Yes. They are in my top 5 bands of all time that I enjoy listening to and got me through a lot of hard times. I had a very hard time eliminating going for the one based upon the strength of Awaken and Turn of the Century. And Awaken might be the last great. I think this was around 1978 or 79, 77 maybe. I'm doing this all from memory, not from any notes at all. And the title track's a little annoying, but Awaken is might be one of the great last great progressive long songs of all time. The interlude with Wakeman on keyboards with that organ, and then the percussion comes in and the tempo builds. It's an amazing song. And Turn of the Century, in my opinion, epitomizes how great the songwriting team of Steve Howe and John Anderson really is, because they talk about the great songwriters, Lennon, McCartney, duos, Simon and Garfunkel, Rogers and Hammerstein, Seals and Crofts, yeah, Stephen Stills, David. I mean, my goodness, nobody ever talks about Anderson Howe. And these two songwriters and musicians wrote an amazing amount of intricate, beautiful melodies, great compositions. And John Anderson really is not a very gifted instrument player. I guess he has everything in his head. He's a fantastic writer, in my opinion, as a fellow writer. I think I read where he picks words for lyrics based upon how they sound rather than the actual meaning. I'm guilty of that as the flagship author of God Bless the Keg Publishing. I've done that myself, so I can relate. But I guess he has the music in his head and dictates it, and it just transposes somehow. And the great comedian Jackie Gleason created great records of mood music. in the 50s and 60s. And maybe we'll cover him in a video. And he couldn't read or write music, but he could conduct an orchestra and he could dictate the compositions in his mind and then relate them to someone who could actually create the music. Maybe John Anderson, same boat. But at any rate, Tales from Topographic Oceans is number 5. And we bumped going for the one out of it. What cover art by Roger Dean. I mean, he created a tapestry here that just fit the, 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 the depth of this record and how intricate and weird and mystical and magical it is. Even the font, I love the multicolor font. And I elevated Tales, even though it was a really controversial record for Yes. Some critics hated it. Some fans hated it. Some fans loved it. I was on the fence for a long time, but then I grew to really love Tales. Revealing Science of God is one of the best Yes compositions of all time. And I know there's a lot of fluff and there's a lot of fiddly bits. And they were in hotels by candlelight and they played drums and percussion on tree trunks and brought fake barnyard animals. You can read the stories. But Revealing Science of God is absolutely captivating. It's a beautiful, beautiful record. And yes, you could probably eliminate quite a bit and drill down to the actual composition of the song and maybe get rid of 5 or 8 minutes of it. And I know Rick Wakeman has said that he didn't originally like it, but now he enjoys playing it because it is beautiful. And Wakeman adds a lot to that song. And then you have the Remembering and the Ancient. They have sections of beauty. And I think that's the magic of Yes. Aside from the extravagance and the fluff, when you drill down, there's some gorgeous melodies. That's what makes Tales so magical. Masterpiece that's overlooked is Relayer by Yes. And Wakeman has departed. Patrick Moraz appears on keyboards. He's a wizard, does a great job, in my opinion. And this is almost like fusion, rock fusion, prog fusion, jazz fusion. I don't know how to classify it. The shining star is Steve Howe on guitar. He just rips this apart. He really does a fantastic job on this record. And, Gates of Delirium is this frenzy that finally settles into chord structure and melody and beauty. And then you have To Be Over and Sound Chaser, all kind of the same thing. Percussion's hard hitting. This is Alan White on drums. It's really hard hitting it. The engineering is where the drumming is very pronounced. To Be Over with the great, beautiful little sub ballad there, Soon, one of Yes's best moments. Once more, fantastic songwriting. Number 3 is Fragile. And this is the record that really introduced me as a very young man to Yes. The single Roundabout was played at an ice skating rink in Totowa, New Jersey all the time by the Friday night DJ, Disco Dave. And he would play the single version, which doesn't do justice to the actual album deep track, primary cut, I should say, of Roundabout, with the organ solo that one gentleman said was the Rick Wakeman's greatest moment and one of the greatest organ solos in all of rock. You got the little starship airplane flyer guy that makes an appearance on John Anderson's Elias, A Sun Hillo. Once more, Roger Dean with a spectacular moment. The solo tracks, the little individual cuts by the band members are okay. I think Chris Squire is probably the best out of them. And but I love Heart of the Sunrise. My goodness, does that show you why Chris Squire, in my opinion, was the greatest bass player in all rock and roll? My goodness, just the bass line, how that song just progresses in tempo. Whew, what a song. South Side of the Sky is good too. Then we go to number 2, which is the Yes album. And I try not, as a photographer for God Bless the Keg, I try not to be swayed by what I think is just great concept photography. I just love this album cover. The chair, the weird floating mannequin head, and the band members, and the great lighting here. And I remember this on vinyl. Um, it's more captivating on vinyl. The band members leave, and you got the weird head and the empty chair. I used an old chair in a series of photography, and maybe I'm partial to this, but I love it. Yours is No Disgrace, one of my favorite songs of all time, yes or otherwise. Perpetual Change, Starship Trooper, and I love Avenger. It's got this weird little, you know, fiddly bit. I think it's Tony K, I guess, on keyboards at this point. Um, and the intro and the outro are really captivating, but yours is No Disgrace. My goodness. Does that show you Steve Howe's talents? This is when Howe first comes to Yes to establish that Yes Howe sound. And yeah, he's come and gone, but he's been an anchor for Yes. And my dad always used to say, "Don't go in business with friends or family." There's always going to be conflicts, and I know Steve and John need to patch things up, but whatever. Um, Steve Howe is just one of the. I'm going to do my top five guitarists, and certainly Steve Howe's going to be there. There isn't anything the man can't do. He even plays the steel pedal. Check out the live cut. Yours is No Disgrace. And Steve Howe goes absolutely off the chain. Howe is established his presence on the Yes album. It's a fantastic album. I always come back to this album, even more so than any other Yes music. Love. It's so listenable. If you have to introduce somebody to Yes music, don't bring him to Tales. Bring him to the Yes album. They'll enjoy it. Number one, far and away, is the masterpiece known as Close to the Edge. It's the greatest prog rock record of all time. There's no question. As much as I love Ian Anderson and Jethro Tull and Thick as a Brick, and I love everything about Tull, it Thick as a Brick does not even scratch the outer surface of how great Close to the Edge is. This is a classic lineup with Squire, Anderson, Billy on drums, Rick Wakeman, Steve Howe, and of course the great Eddie Offord as the engineer producer, the magician in the studio as a pseudo member. And if you think of not only the great gifted musicians and how they played on this record, but also the actual time era that this was recorded in the olden days, so to speak, using magnetic tape and dubbing and dubbing and dubbing these parts. I read where that the tape got so thin they were worried that they couldn't capture the music off of it. It's an engineering feat. It's a miracle. Even if you kind of categorize it, the music and the production and the electronics and the engineering as two separate categories. It's just a masterpiece all around. And I read where they threw some tape in the dumpster by accident and they had to go retrieve it. Close to the Edge. I think if we could get all the band members back, maybe use the Infinity Stones and change time, I'd love to know what went through their mind as a creator myself to create such a masterpiece. And they would all say, all these band members would say, this is the best moment of Yes. Probably never to be duplicated by any other band. I know that I'll put this in my top five records of all time. It's just a marvel. So there we go. 5-1, the best of Yes studio albums. Thanks for tuning in. We will see you next time. Give us a like, dislike, subscribe, whatever. You won't hurt my feelings. I'm just a guy from Paterson, New Jersey. And shout out to the Tiki Bar. I'm wearing the hat. Jenkinson's Pier, Point Pleasant, New Jersey. Glad you were able to rebuild after Sandy. Spent a lot of great time there. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.